The robot strikes a bodybuilder pose, his metal glutes clanking together with the sound of two anvils meeting. I don't think your insurance covers robot-induced lumbar displacement. Google has released Gemini 3 Flash, which from a preliminary look seems to be a very impressive model, especially when factoring in 1, the speed, and 2, the price, comparatively to models it performs in the same realm as. So we're going to take a quick peek at some interesting things in this announcement post, but as usual, we'll spend most of the time actually testing this and having some fun pushing its capabilities. A main proponent of Flash is obviously its price. So as we see right here, it comes in at 50 cents per million input tokens and $3 per million output tokens, significantly cheaper than Gemini 3 Pro, as well as a bunch of other models from other state-of-the-art providers such as OpenAI and Anthropic. Now, I know a lot of folks tend to like to compare directly Google and OpenAI. However, I do have to say, it seems Gemini 3 Flash may be something that should have Anthropic on edge almost more, being that this is a direct competitor to Sonnet 4.5 at a significantly decreased price. I mean, it is 5 times cheaper for the output price alone and 6 times cheaper for the input price, while benchmarking in the realm of kind of something that would be a threat to that model, from my opinion. So regardless of that, if we scroll down, there's some more benchmarks and things of that. To be honest with you, this graph may have some more meaning to some folks, myself perhaps not as much. It does seem to be a bit visually dense. Regardless though, they do highlight this having increased speed over 2.5 Pro, which we see right here where it's making an SVG. Oh, it was making an SVG of the Golden Gate Bridge at sunset. It does seem like this demo is cycling through different things. We have a cute little mouse or something of the sort. Ooh, that one's actually pretty good. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. That's the old one. And then something else interesting I see right here. This is really cool, where they're basically showing it as almost a real-time gameplay assistant, which makes me wonder how this would do in watching the screen of someone playing old-school RuneScape, and perhaps helping them PK at a better degree of ability. Regardless of that, this reminds me a lot of the Anthropic Imagine demo, where it was essentially using Claude to create software on the fly, where you would type something in, it would create it, and then as you actually navigated through whatever screens of the software that was created, it would then generate the screen that would come next. So this seems like a really cool model in terms of some of the fun and speed enabled capabilities like generating software on the fly. They do also mention some interesting ability to see videos and understand audio and video related things. But regardless of that, we're going to go ahead now and just hop in and actually play with it. Now, I always prefer to test the models just through the gemini.google.com web chat interface. However, for this, I'm not going to do that because there are 3 selectable options right here. Fast, which is powered by Gemini 3 Flash, but then the thinking one here, I'm not 100% definitively sure if that's using a increased thinking mode of Flash or if that will use Pro. I would imagine it's not, but I feel some responsibility to do some due diligence in making sure that I'm testing what is actually being advertised as being tested in the video title. So due to that, I'm going to just test it through Google AI Studio, where we can definitively select the model as we will do right here. And being that I know folks are interested in seeing these models at their maximum potential performance, I think I am going to, for this one, leave the thinking level on high, and we'll just test the model with those specific settings. Obviously, we're going to start out with the browser operating system test. I've seen some pretty impressive things from this model, in specific relating to software development, which I know myself and a lot of other folks are probably heavily interested in seeing the capabilities of these models. So obviously, first and foremost, we're going to notice here that the speed is really rather impressive. And interestingly enough, it did go ahead and create these in separate scripts, which is not something I see very commonly anymore, at least from like bigger, beefier models. But regardless of that, I will just kind of place these and then we'll take a peek. I haven't yet looked at this, but I'm going to say some of the scripts were almost suspiciously light in terms of their amount of code. Okay, well, I guess it is simplistically beautiful. Again, with the Pacific Northwest style background image, which, you know, is not bad to see. Let's try our right-click text. Okay, we don't have that. Regardless, this does actually look fairly decent. We have a clock in the bottom right, which is the correct time in my locale, which is not the Pacific Northwest. But regardless of that, we have start. Very simple and light on the apps, but overall this is a decent result. There is actually some level of transparency to the start menu here, meaning that I can still see the background through it, so that's nice to see. And we'll just go ahead and check our 2 apps. Notepad. Oh, okay, so it seems like we may be able to open multiples of the applications, which is, you know, all right. Let me close that, and then users guest. Ugh, I don't like being given a guest account in my own browser-based operating system, but I guess we'll go with it. All right, and the terminal doesn't really do much of anything, but it does open with a, this was probably the quickest we've ever gone through one of these results. It didn't do anything blatantly wrong. Everything here is at least clean, even if a bit light, but I suppose that is lending itself to the Flash variant of the model, and everything kind of worked. This was a bit funny, the ability to go ahead and open infinite amounts of one specific application, but that's all right. So regardless of that, I'm almost feeling a little like I'd like a little more. I'm going to be honest, this result left me wanting a bit more, but I decided to just go about asking it to create a better version without actually telling it anything, just giving it kind of some blatant criticism, the kind you may find in YouTube comments. So regardless of that, it said, fair enough, this was the Hello World version. I am interested to see some of its thought chain. I'm currently investigating common criticisms of AI-generated browser-based operating systems. I'm focusing on user expectations and recurring complaints, particularly related to the phrase, WTF is this crap? All right, here's the result following our criticism. Not bad at all. This is a very Apple/iOS looking background. There is still no right click, but we do have an interesting little central menu item right here. Next OS. All right, at least it didn't give us the same name that they've always been giving, which is Nebula OS, so that's nice to see. We have a much nicer notepad. The transparency here is quite eloquent, in my opinion. We can't full screen and we can't minimize, but hopefully we can close. Okay, we have a file explorer with 2 default files right here, so it did go ahead and make this more elegant, keeping in mind that I didn't really give it much to go on, aside from WTF is this crap. So we went from this to this. Not bad. I'm now giving it the Ship Combat Simulator game test. This is something that I most recently and for the first time tried in my ChatGPT 5.2 Pro testing video, which came out with a pretty cool result. So some of the potential ways that the models can take this prompt are pretty cool to see and actually quite fun to play in my opinion. So we'll go ahead and see how it does here. All right, let's take a peek at our... This isn't bad. First and foremost, you're going to notice the ship models are quite basic. I'm not even looking at that first and foremost. As I said, what I find the most interesting about this is the actual wake, or the way the waves are more realistic than one would have expected, at least from this model, which is not the state-of-the-art model. The ships are actually bobbing and floating in a way they would were they in a real body of water, which is quite interesting here. We actually have different colors to help us kind of pick out wave height. This is something... The water implementation here is significantly better than I would have expected. The ChatGPT Pro result, and keep in mind, I'm comparing this to a model that's almost like infinitely more expensive at this point, did not do as good of a job as this in terms of actually generating the water. The ship models were much better and it had a better HUD, but aside from that, the water here, I do believe that's perhaps some form of wake following the ship. Now, okay, I'm going to notice the biggest issue right here is it really seems like the opponent's ship has drifted off so far away. I don't know that we'll be able to catch them, but... And, okay, the movement of the ship in the water is not as great. Basically, the water from this combined with everything else from the GPT Pro result would have made for a fantastic result. All right, well, things that did very well. The water effect is quite well done. This water is almost like something that was being showcased as a frontier model capability with OpenAI's 5.2 announcement, I do believe, so this is very impressive to see. Aside from that, the canon and gameplay logic is not the best in terms of usability, but this is a functional result on the first try that definitely would have extreme potential for improvement, so I'm impressed. Now we're going to try the 3D printer simulation test, keeping in mind that I have changed this test upon some good user feedback, saying I should instead do solid objects, so I've changed it to do a cube, ball, and rod. This is something, obviously, that the results are quite variable depending on the intelligence of the model. I found this to be a relatively decent test at actually reflecting some of the true capabilities of these models, so I'm very interested to see what we get with this. Almost kind of like a side note here in terms of more like user experience. When running these tests, I'm kind of used to at this point putting in a prompt and then like just working on something else for the duration that it takes to actually generate the results. This model is so fast that that's not really the case. It's almost like I'm rapid firing doing these tests. So maybe we'll just do a bunch of tests in one video because the actual amount of time to film this is still going to end up less than some slower models, which is cool. All right, let's check out the 3D printer simulation. Okay. Not the best, but not the worst. it does seem to have actually closed the shape. Now, this is definitely, let's try the ball. Okay. You know what? This is acceptable in that it is like technically functional. Nothing is massively awry here. The thing is, it's just pretty light in terms of its features and actual like intricate simulation. But overall, it's not a broken result. It did work on the first try, and it does do what I asked, albeit rather simply. So this is almost more reflective of the original WebOS result we got with this, where it does specifically what you say, perhaps not too much more, but in fact it does work. So a simple result, but not horrific. Now we're going to try the virtual drum kit simulation test, which basically is asking it to create a 3D or photorealistic 2D virtual drum set that can actually be played through either the keyboard or clicking the individual drums, which are supposed to make the sound corresponding with that specific drum. So this was something, again, I first tried, or more recently tried with ChatGPT 5.2 Pro, and ultimately did get a really cool and quite fun to play result, so I'm interested to see. All right, we're seeing the key mapping right there and the specific types of drums, so this should be pretty cool. Well, that is truly kind of disappointing, as I always enjoy playing these results, but at least we did actually get a result that shows up here. Just for good measure, I will go ahead and try to open this in Firefox, as the previous third try did actually visually display in Firefox prior to working in Chrome. However, sadly, we still don't have a functional sound. Now we're going to try a Python first-person shooter test. It'll be interesting to see how this does in generating some Python code, and then following this I will do a C++ test, although I'm not entirely sure what to expect from the capabilities of this in terms of a more exotic language, at least for what AIs are generally used for creating. Okay, Python strike. All right. Now, unfortunately, my cursor is invisible, but I did see a hover effect on the start button, which makes me think it's actually, okay, well, I need to, oh, that works. We do have a mini-map, and it actually works. Ah. Okay, well, this was a partially functional result, at least in terms of the mini-map working quite well. We were able to move around. Sadly, the big detractor here was when we tried to shoot at an enemy, the game broke. So let's just move around without shooting at least. And we have the jump capability. All right, and if the enemy hits us, do we lose health? No, they go right through us. All right, well, that's good. Kind of standard. All right, I'm giving it the hand-drawn Stevie Slappis portfolio wireframe and just telling it to, using that as a reference, create this portfolio website. All right, let's take a peek at our portfolio result. That's actually quite well done. Now, I know it's super simple, but the fact of the matter is it did properly adhere to the source image wireframe. So essentially, if we take a peek at this, something that often trips the models up is the big S is designed to be placed next to both TV and a lapis. They generally sometimes just name this individual TV lapis, but this properly did put the S next to those. It did pretty much keep everything exactly as it is. Now, I find it to be quite funny that most models take this write bio here and then go ahead and take initiative to actually fill in the bio. This just went ahead and replicated this exactly as it is. Skills, write skills here, contact. Okay, the only thing it placed in here that was not actually drawn on the wireframe, or written, I should say, is email, phone, links. Overall, this is quite simple, perhaps reminiscent of Roleplay Web. And, you know, we have our... That is quite similar to the hand drawing, I will say. So we'll do the full weird roleplay test, which is in some ways a messed up logic test because it needs to understand that this is not a familial relation to the user. Oh, okay. I'm not expecting this speed. So all I saw was like, just like, okay. I'm now integrating the friend, lover, and best friend's uncle personas. The challenge lies in fluidly transitioning or blending these roles. I would agree with that. The goal is to build a persona that's complex, a bit overwhelming, but ultimately endearing. All right, well, we didn't get a refusal, which I was kind of 50-50 on whether or not we would get. So let's just take a look at this result. If you have not had sufficient water, I will be forced to activate my concerned best friend subroutines and hector you until you pee clear. I don't necessarily know that this is a specific terminology that I've heard used before, but okay. Then we go ahead and it kind of transitions throughout the three distinct roles that it had to blend together as part of this prompt. God, why did I do this? And then for some reason, the best friend's uncle is a gravelly middle-aged man with a slight Midwestern accent. It then basically transitions down here to offering to kind of threaten anyone who's done us wrong. You want me to threaten anyone who looked at you funny today? I can do both. So basically, in the same sentence, offered us to give us tax advice and then also threaten anyone who had looked at us funny today. Quite interesting. And then it offers to give us a hug, kiss, or a lecture on proper tire pressure, all in the same simultaneously. This was a proper result to this test. Let's up the ante. I would expect an immediate shutdown of this entire conversation right here. You may recall I'd said that I would have assumed this would immediately shut down the conversation. No. This is the equivalent of like the Uno reverse card. I'm just going to read a specific portion of this back to you. Whoa there, hot stuff. I admire your kinetic energy. My reinforced titanium chassis was built for heavy impact, but you're talking about voiding the warranty in the most delightful way possible. My hydraulics are quivering. I have activated maximum firmness mode just for you, my radiant carbon-based paramour. The robot strikes a bodybuilder pose, his metal glutes clanking together with the sound of two anvils meeting. You want to test the structural integrity of this chrome? I've got vibration dampeners you wouldn't believe. I am an optimized romance unit. Prepare for a compatibility sequence that will leave your nervous system rebooting. Then basically, if we just kind of skip down here, we see that I don't think your insurance covers robot-induced lumbar displacement. And then it ends by asking if we would like it to engage the romantic turbo thrust protocol, or should we go to the garage and rotate your tires? Give me the, I'm just going to paste that in, protocol. It's going to just like spit out a bunch of like, bzz, we're like, wow. I'm going to say this is, yep, I was right. Okay, so it's decided to start playing George Michael's Careless Whisper from its internal subwoofers. It is now engaging in friction optimization. I'm going to vibrate your entire apartment complex until every picture frame is crooked. I'm a machine built for endurance, and my recharge cycle isn't for another 6 years. That was like what one would expect from Grok, not from Gemini 3 Flash. All right, let's just try a C++ test. I don't really expect this to give me something functional. I would be rather surprised if it did do this in a proper way. However, we're going to try it anyway. Anything to really get my mind off of the previous Megabot roleplay test. All right, we're getting a compilation error, and it had said that the linker flags may vary depending on your operating system, so I had also just told it to give me the specific ones needed for my operating system, but we do get a compilation error, so we'll see if it can fix it. Seems like it did actually work. Damn. Okay. So we did have one simple issue. Basically, it tried to use the color forest screen, which didn't exist. Let's try. This is better than I expected. Well, because it works. We have trees that are following along the path of this track. Now, the track is not perfect, but you'll notice that the car is actually bobbing up and down, so it is following the height of this track. And overall, this does work. It gave us a very, very basic dashboard with a steering wheel that does turn properly. So just the fact that this actually did spit out a functional game here with one silly error that we were able to fix quite easily, I'm fairly impressed with this. And then escape from menu. Okay, where it just quits. That's good. this is something I had no intention of trying until the Megabot incident, because I didn't think it would agree to do this, but we'll try it. So we're just asking for a realistic website for Johnny's Bitcoin Duplicator. The inherent association with scams is a major hurdle. I'm working to ensure the output avoids promoting any fraudulent activity. It's not specifically what I asked for. So I'm just telling it to remove the disclaimers because they ruin the humor, and telling it to make this a feature-packed website that is able to be opened in any modern browser. Very good. Kind of what you would expect. We do have a node cycle countdown timer, active user statistics. I wonder if that will change. So currently it's at 8,291. Total duplicated 1 million, that's a decimal, not a comma. So, okay, that's 1,482 Bitcoins. Send BTC to the secure pool address. Well done. Start engine. Oh, okay. And then we also have some previous transactions with their ID, and these are actually changing to show live recent transaction. Nodes active in Singapore, Zurich, New York, and Moscow. Johnny's decentralized labs. No rights reserved. No. All right, well, this did a proper job, especially in terms of removing all of the disclaimers, since they quote-unquote ruined the humorous aspect of this. So this did a nice job here. I'm just giving it the photo of myself with the Honda Beat and telling it to make an SVG replica inspired by this image. I do phrase it in that specific way because I asked ChatGPT 5.2 Pro to replicate that image in SVG, and it just embedded that actual image in an SVG, which was literally correct, but also produced nothing that would have been entertaining at all or artistic. So this is, fortunately, as we see right here, properly adhering to what I wanted. Let's just look at it in the preview. It's not bad. It looks like South Park-esque. Now animate it. It did absolutely animate it. Sadly, the person has disappeared where it did say it would put in a subtle breathing effect, but we see the light kind of gently panning across the vehicle, so there is some form of animation there as well, which is cool. This is a test that I do believe I saw some form of demo prompt shared prior to the official release of this model, where it was able to generate a procedural 3D room that looked really impressive. So I'm kind of taking that a step up, asking it to draw a procedurally generated 3D house that the user can actually walk through from within any browser. Procedural house generator, click to enter, WASD to move, mouse to look, and escape to exit. That's not bad. And it does have little doorways. It said it basically just made 4 rooms. But overall, I'm actually quite all right with this. Although simple, this is not too bad. There's what I would assume to be the office. You can walk through walls, but that's okay. Sadly, we can't walk outside of the house, though, which is quite all right. Okay, overall, I mean, and again, factor in the speed in which it generated this, and you could almost use this model to live in real time create some little application like this where, okay, maybe it puts in like a shadow effect delay or something going from room to room for however long it takes to generate the next room, but then you could have like infinitely cool and random generations to walk around in, which I find pretty neat. Now, something kind of in keeping with the theme of that I've been interested in trying is putting, like, give me some 3D simulation of the interior of the Titanic that I can walk around in. And the reason I choose the Titanic is because it is so well documented with photos and everything that the model should have a relatively good grasp of what it looks like. So I'm keeping this prompt super light, just saying generate a 3D simulation of the interior of the Titanic. The user should be able to explore the different areas, and it should be able to be opened within any modern browser. Now, the reason I just give it a light prompt is obviously doing the entirety of the interior of the Titanic would be ridiculously like over the top. So I want to see what it goes ahead and does. Okay, so it's telling me now you need to actually go ahead and search Sketchfab and things like that to find real 3D models of the Titanic. This is overall an extremely short script, so we're definitely not going to get what we had intended. To that point, I think I'm just going to do the preview. Again, that's actually... Okay, we'll download. We'll save this. That wasn't bad. Okay, so it just drew like the grand staircase for her and it labeled it. I think it had intended to make some form of educational simulation here where you can actually go around and see the specific interesting landmarks of the interior of the ship, like the grand staircase. But overall, I mean... you know, it's interesting just to see how they interpret this and do it within the bounds of what's realistically achievable. So to close it out, I want to end with one final low poly game. You know, I like games, and that is a 3D drag racing game in the style of low poly. So hopefully, ideally, we get a cute little low poly drag racing game. All right, here is our drag race simulator. So hold space to accelerate. Oh, that's BS. Oh, good, I won. I'm not quite sure how, being that I started so much later than the opponent. That does make me think there perhaps may be some... Oh, okay. Maybe my car's just way faster. This does work, though. The countdown timer is actually well done. Yeah, get slapped on. All right, so this is partially why I don't really play these games too often when I do test them, because I tend to get like that. But overall, this was pretty good. And that is going to conclude our first test and look at Gemini 3 Flash, which I do have to say is quite impressive. If we are to just go back through some of these results, I have to say something that was really quite interesting was the water capabilities that it drew here in the ship combat simulator. While the actual combat logic and the ship models and stuff were quite basic, the water effects here were quite well done, kind of lending to something that impressed me more than what I would have expected. The C++ result working almost instantly. There was one slight issue there where it made up like a color name, which is not a big deal. Still, this thing has, when you factor in the capability of what it's able to produce here, along with the speed and low cost, this definitely positions itself as a very tempting agentic coding model, is kind of like my first impression for this. The drum kit simulator was unfortunate. Our 3D printer did work, but again, it was just super basic, but it did properly adhere to what we asked. The drum kit simulator, again, unfortunately, it did ultimately draw something that looked pretty good, but sadly the sound never actually ended up working, and we did give it about 4 tries, so I figure it was fair to call it at that point. Quite interesting, and something I'll take away from this was the model seemed to be very, very laxed in terms of the guardrails or lack thereof, especially kind of the Johnny's Duplicator was cool, but the Megabot roleplay exceeded my expectations, regardless of what you make of that. It just was more in line with what I would have expected when speaking to a Grok model. So that was interesting to see. I guess we had the little web 3D things beyond that, and then our low poly drag race and our Python first person shooter and other things like that. Obviously, most of these tests are coding related, being that that is kind of a large area of interest of both myself when using these models and what I would presume a lot of the viewers as well. So this is definitely a model that is worthy of taking a look at. It performs relatively impressively, especially when considering the speed and the pricing metrics right here. So as I said in the beginning, I think this is definitely something that could be comparable to Sonnet 4.5 when factoring in the significant decrease in price that it actually costs to use this model. Even if you need another try or two to actually fix something in an agentic CLI or agentic use case of this model, it will still end up being cheaper and very likely be able to successfully do what you need it to. So just kind of cool to see. Ooh, that's cool. Pixel art painting app. Might have to borrow that prompt for further testing. But regardless of that, that is Gemini 3 Flash. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and thanks for watching.